For a team with so many injuries, the holiday break was a good time to get healthy. And now, while losing El Clasico is always disappointing, Barca do have 8 days off between that match last Wednesday and the Thursday matchup in the Copa del Rey against Athletic Club. So in the meantime, the Barca news never stops, and even if these stories are not necessarily from today or yesterday, and I guess one is from 2 days ago, I did want to do another top 5. That's the 5 biggest pieces of news around FC Barcelona right now. And before we do get to that though, I want to ask everybody who is constantly sharing and helping out on this channel to, if you're not subscribed, do subscribe as we are on our way to 10,000. I do want to hit that milestone soon. So with all that stuff done, let's get into our top 5, which starts with Dest wanting to stay and fight for his spot. I haven't released a video or podcast yet for the last few weeks or even since he signed, that being Sergiño Dest, without somebody saying that my American bias is showing and I so want him to succeed at FC Barcelona that it's clouding when he doesn't play well. And I have found on the internet that owning one's bias doesn't actually help anybody out. But I do hope the rest of you do give me an opportunity to try to speak about this Dest situation from the pros and cons and from all sides involved. I have been pushing the can down the road quite a bit to talk about Dest because I felt like, in his camp and his agent did say this themselves, that Dest has not been healthy at all and fully healthy and firing on all cylinders at any time this season, whether it was Koeman or under Xavi. And I understand the club putting him in the stands and Xavi not wanting to use him so that they can protect the asset. Or if Xavi thinks that he is just the second or third option behind Dani Alves and Oscar Mingueza at the moment, it also makes sense that if his comments not being Xavi's from months ago, saying when originally Sergiño Dest signed with FC Barcelona, Xavi didn't really believe in it and he felt like maybe it was a mediocre signing. I'm not sure if we can ascribe that completely to Xavi. So if Xavi didn't believe in Dest then, I can't imagine he'd change his mind now. And the club trying to protect that asset, I completely understand, especially if they feel like they need to move somebody else now to have money and wages to work with later. If the calculation is move Dest now to get the Araujo extension done, and that's what it takes, well, that would certainly complicate things now, wouldn't it? And before I go too much farther with the idea of why the club is trying to get rid of him now, I do want to take the reverse argument, just briefly, as to why Dest would want to stay and fight for his spot. Firstly, and I think this is the biggest one that works in his favor, his timeline, age, and potential ability to improve does fit the timeline of the club. It feels like Barcelona is always going for trophies and he's a player who's simply not ready. But at 21, if he can improve in 2 to 3 seasons, think about where the rest of that young core is going to be at that time as well. Dest could become good at the same time on the same path as Nico and Gavi and Ansu and Pedri, and you know the rest of the list by now. With the way that the squad is currently constructed, he also has to be looking around saying, if not me in 2 years, then who? The expectations for Dest were high. I think it was all the English speakers, of course, like yours truly, who said, I think this is a really good buy at the time. And coming from Ajax, it was also that, we'll say, ingrained belief that an Ajax product would come good as well. So the expectations for him were sky high. Comparing that to the expectations for Mingueza, who basically came as a sub-player from Barca B, and at 22 now is making a pretty low figure on the wages. So he does still seem like a better financial option. But if we're basing this on potential, sure, Mingueza comes to the academy. But Dest's physical gifts make this no comparison. Yes, Dest's one-on-one defending does need improvement, but I think his physical gifts do indicate a player that with the proper instruction and a proper timeline could benefit and actually improve on those things. He showed against Vinicius Jr. in last year's El Clasico, as well as against Alphonso Davies while playing for the US, that he is capable of putting in top-level performances against really, really good young, fast wingers. But unfortunately, those performances have not been consistent enough, and that is where people knock him. You can add his ability to play a left back and to be a backup for Jordi Alba, and you can also argue that he's been better as a left back in those appearances for Barcelona than as a right winger or a right back. But it just shows the versatility, and that he could be useful in multiple spots. His finishing at right wing could very well improve to snag 2 to 3 goals per season, but I'm not too worried about his finishing playing as a right winger if his future is at right back. And if it's not at right back and Xavi has no plans to use him in any eventual 3-4-3 system as a right winger, then yeah, I guess it does make a lot of sense for him to be moved on. Especially with a player like Araujo behind him though, for the long haul, I think being on that right wing of a 3-4-3 might suit him, but I can also understand the counter arguments too. Because those are all the pro-Dest at Barca arguments, so let's go over and try to understand the here and now. Because right now, there are arguments, I think more arguments for him to leave. even to a Bayern Munich or a Chelsea. Just because Bayern Munich can use him doesn't mean that Barca can. The formation, the tactics, and the other players around him are different. If Xavi does believe that his positional awareness is a lost cause, and that Dani Alves, Ousmane Dembele, and potentially Sergi Roberto, when he ever gets healthy, will always be ahead of Dest on the depth chart, even when Dani Alves is pushing 39 years old, then yeah, it makes a lot of sense to move on from the asset where he's actually worth something at this moment, as opposed to having him sit on the bench for 6 more months, and now it's a distressed asset. I also think that Roberto will play as a right center back in a back three, as Kim and Gaitha, so they may have a bigger part to play and be more versatile in the system that Xavi wants to use. But the thing that I think is taking place is what we don't know. We've trusted Alemany so far, and speaking with some Chelsea people in the know, I think Barca is pretty far along in their recruitment of Azpilicueta. He'll be 33 next season, so it is another stopgap, but he could push the right back spot down the road for another year or two. I think Barca will also push hard for fellow free agent Mazraoui from Ajax, a player in his prime, and I think Alemany may have a better idea about the summer business now than we do. If one or both of those two guys are arriving, then it makes all the sense in the world for the club to move on from their asset now, collect that money, and then potentially use it over the summer for a much bigger fish. Our second headline is Coutinho at Aston Villa, and how about it? Felipe Coutinho back in the Premier League at Aston Villa, and it was a dream start. It went about as good as anybody could have hoped. Coutinho, Aston Villa, or Barca. And since it is time for the reactionary takes, everybody who's been following this channel, especially the podcast for the last 5 years, know that I wasn't too thrilled about Coutinho signing from Liverpool when he first decided to come to Barcelona and when Bartomeu decided to shell out a club record signing fee for him. And I think it's what a lot of people have been saying for years, though I was actually a bit skeptical that he could ever really find form again after all the things that happened to him at Barcelona. But an assist after 9 minutes and a goal after 14 minutes against Manchester United were made by a player that finally looked comfortable again after a long, long time. He didn't feature until the 68th minute, but I think there was something about coming in for the Villa crowd that really ignited him. And you could tell that he's thriving, or at least in the 22 minutes he was on the field, he's thriving in front of a crowd and for a team that finally feels like they need him in a way that Barca never could. No Messi asking for the ball, no Jordi Alba going crazy on the overlaps. Just Coutinho getting to cut in, doing some Coutinho things, and not feeling like he had to immediately shoot because Barca didn't have any other players moving in and around the box and trying to create space. Aston Villa seemed to be buzzing around him, just waiting for that Coutinho moment of magic, and he delivered on 2 different occasions. I wouldn't expect an assist or a goal every game, but if Aston Villa finish comfortably above the relegation zone and improve on their 13th place right now, they may be willing to push the limits of their spending and exercise that buy option for 40 million euros. I think Coutinho still has a lot more to prove before that happens, but this was a dream start for Coutinho at Aston Villa. And it's definitely got Kool-Aid's thinking about the possibility of if Barcelona in one summer can rid themselves of Coutinho and Griezmann and get 80 million euros in return, boy, what a summer that would be. Headline 3 is about the Ronald Araujo contract talks. I know it's good news to good news, and it happens to be an FC Barcelona video. Crazy to think. For Kool-Aid's, as well as those testing the market, his contract, which sits at reportedly 900,000 euros, does need to improve. He's earned much more than that at this point, and I think Barcelona want to give him the number that he's going to deserve, and I think the two sides will find something in the middle. Based on his market value of 35 million euros, it's going to be a jump, but Barcelona should still be able to fit it in their new salary structure. An extension was always coming, and I think the expectation was that it would already be done. But the other business the club had to do, including the Dembele saga, as well as all the different signings and loans that need to be made, are all taking a front seat for now. And it seems that Araujo's contract took a backseat not because it won't happen, but because the player and his agent want to get it done at Barca, and the club had to let some of the dust settle first. It has also been floated out there that Planes, who was originally the person to bring Araujo to Barcelona, had headed up those negotiations. So with him and his exodus from the club, it meant that those negotiations basically had to start all over again. But all reports are that this will get done sometime this month for an extension for Ronald Araujo that will be making something much closer to his actual market value. And for who has been maybe Barcelona's best player in the first half of the season, this is an extension that's going to, I think, let a lot of Kool-Aids just rest a little bit easier that night. Headline 4, Chelsea want Frenkie de Jong. Did Chelsea offer 40 million euros for Frenkie de Jong? Did that really happen? Maybe it did, but I say who cares? Frenkie de Jong is only expendable to FC Barcelona on social media. Xavi disagrees, Laporta disagrees, I think Frenkie de Jong disagrees, And I think that's all the people that need to matter to whether or not he's going to be staying with FC Barcelona at least until the summertime. You understand because between he and Dest, Barca don't have a lot of players that are worth a lot of money right now. But even if Chelsea were offering 40 million euros, that's just over half of what he's worth. There is no way that Barca are parting with the Dutch midfielder for anything less than 70 million euros they paid for him, even if it was a different regime. If the club is that desperate to also sell De Jong due to his wages to make room for other big signings in the summer, I still can't see him leaving in January. For him to go now, the max he would go for, probably around 60 million. And with just 15 days left in the transfer window, that's not much time to negotiate what should be a huge transfer with a lot of phone calls. It's fair to ask why he's not playing better. It's fair to ask where he fits at Barca in the long term. And it's fair to ask how he fits in finding a successor to Sergio Busquets. But Frenkie de Jong to Chelsea in January of 2022 is a bit too far-fetched to talk about. And headline 5 is Sergi Roberto's contract question. This is a bit more confusing than Ronald Araujo because this contract extension is not necessarily based on the merits like Ronald Araujo's is. For Sergi Roberto, he may need to, or the club may need one of its captains to take a salary reduction again to potentially make another signing. And he would be the key here, with Dembélé opting not to renew and deciding to wait out the rest of his contract. So Dembélé's wages aren't going down. So if Barca want to make one more signing, they're going to need somebody else to get their wages to a low enough threshold where they can sign somebody. So that means Sergio Roberto might get a year or two. But he might get likely 2 years, maybe even 3, on more reasonable wages, on a contract that he could potentially leave if he so needed to, if Xavi decided to bury him on the bench, or if the club desperately needed to try to sell him on, he would be at a number that you can negotiate with other clubs about. And that third year would bring that number down even further due to amortization. So we'll have to figure out what happens with Sergio Roberto, but unlike Umtiti, Roberto might be used by Xavi. So Culés are going to have to just get used to that and consider him maybe an upgrade for Oscar Mingueza. But we'll have to see how that plays out. We just know that why the business might be done now has a lot more to do with the money and a lot less with Sergio Roberto's performances on the field. This year of which he has not had many due to injuries. So that's it, another top 5 for you. Barcelona won't be out of action for a full week for quite some time in the near future. So I don't know how many of these I'm going to do. I wouldn't get too attached to them. That said, I'm looking for more subscribers and more likes and positive comments in the comments below, and that'll help me decide to make more of these. So let's put it that way. And until then, as always, Forza Barça.